Dude, live, man. It's been, how long's it been?
It's Friday. A couple weeks.
I don't know.
A couple weeks.
Did you miss me?
Nah, well, yes.
Right answer. All right. Yeah, so it's been a couple weeks, and we're, again, missing this week's hybrid series because our lazy editor took a week off. And
damn the holidays.
Yeah, you know what? It's going to be tough, too, next week. Because next week, he's here for 2 days. Because we got New Year's and New Year's Eve.
Yeah, that's true.
And we're all working here on New Year's Eve except for Dave. Lazy Dave. So I'm going to try to jam that thing in next week, and it's going to be about calcium and alkalinity. So I thought, man, hey, we'll just talk today about, calcium reactors, because that is definitely going to hit the mix. All right, man. Well, it looks like everybody's rolling on in.
Calcium reactors, not as hard as you think it might be. That's probably what we're trying to solve here. I think, maybe not today, but in the long run.
I think, man, it is actually easier than most people think. So, hey, we should ship to Europe. I think it is, man. I think it is easier. So
I think if you have the right equipment, it can be as easy or easier than like two-part. Maybe.
Yeah, probably. So a lot of people ask, I think, man, is it going to be cheaper? Is there like some way where calcium reactor is cheaper?
Initial cost?
Never.
Upfront cost?
Well,
no.
I shouldn't say never. But yeah, dude, it's going to cost a lot, man. You got to buy the reactor, you got to buy the media done right. A lot of people are going to buy a pH controller or use their own controller.
Yep.
They're also maybe going to buy a regulator with maybe like the carbon doser, which is like $300.
CO2
I think it's expensive.
Tank, probes, the media itself. There's a lot, but once you get into it.
Okay, yeah. Well, once that ship sailed, it's definitely cheaper. At that point, it says CO2 and some calcium reactor media, super cheap.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to just throw out some ideas as to why would anybody even bother doing this? Because Randy here has done it before. I've seen it done here. I've monkeyed around with it a little bit, but I've never really felt the need to do it. So we're going to for sure do it on a couple of these tanks here in the next week or so. But why would anybody want to do a calcium reactor to begin with?
For me, why did I want to go to a calcium reactor? One, because for me it was easier to maintain. It may seem like there's a lot of complicated equipment, a lot of things, moving pieces and whatnot. But once I got everything set up on my home tank, I don't have to mix calcium and alkalinity. I don't have to wash my containers. I don't have to watch my containers. I don't got to adjust dosages. You don't have to deal with precipitate from the alkalinity and calcium drip. And there's some of this that might transfer over into the calcium reactor, like precipitate, things like that, or effluent drip rate. If it's not high enough above the water, you could start to clog it up. But all in all, I had my calcium reactor, I set it up, and then I walked away, and I didn't really touch it for a long time.
So done well, man. That's what it should feel like.
Yeah.
You should be able to set it up and, tune it in, man. Put a little effort in the front, and then be able to say, hey, done. Calcium alkalinity, not my problem.
Yeah.
But I think the fear is that it won't be that easy all the time. Mm-hmm. And I'll just chime in a couple of the same kind of reasons, man, why I would consider a reactor, or why most people would. Is man, it doesn't mess with salinity like a two-part does, so you don't have to worry about doing water changes just to make salinity. Trace elements and stuff, people say.
Potentially.
I'd say potentially all the time because I don't know for sure, but it's very likely that a lot of those media, especially the medias that look like little pieces of Acropora, are probably adding whatever's in the Acropora skeleton back into the tank. Cool factor, man, is gear, dude. So some people just like gear on their tank. It's fun. It's a hobby, man. So, this isn't just a dog food bowl, and your normal kind of pet, man. This is fun. You put a lot of gear in the tank. Some people like to keep it as simple as possible, and in some ways this could be simple as possible, believe it or not, but, we'll dive into that. But you know what? I think having gear is kind of cool, man. It's a toy, somewhat, and I just preach that your LED lights are not a toy. The calcium reactor isn't a toy either, man, but it's a cool thing, to be able to adjust and understand and implement properly. Yeah. So, yeah, awesome, man. So, I thought we'd answer, we had a little email that went out. We said we'd answer a couple of different questions. So we'd ask, can calcium reactors be as easy or easier than two-part kalkwasser? what are the simplest ways to tune a calcium reactor? I think that's the part that scares most people. Tuning it for sure. Like, how do I get this thing in line? Because it's like seems like it's going to be hard. And a lot of the ways it's explained is all mad scientist. So
adjust effluent drip rates and close this down and feed pump speed.
And every one of them goes in, an inverse of the other one. Yeah, so which calcium media to use and why, sizing your calcium reactor properly or more. So those are like 4 things we're going to answer for sure. I saw you circling a question there, Carlos. Which one was it, man? When changing over to calcium reactor from the balling method, do you suggest you do it gradually or just switch over and tune the reactor? That's a good question.
One.
I'll let you roll.
Yeah, the good thing about a calcium reactor, if I were to switch from 2-part to calcium reactor, of course, like we all know in this hobby, or like I try to follow, like abrupt, immediate changes, not so good. So the good thing about a calcium reactor is I don't have to turn that thing full blast, melt all the media full blast. I can gradually ease the media. I can gradually transfer my 2-part or my balling method over to the calcium reactor by maybe changing the pH in my calcium reactor to a higher pH so it doesn't melt media as fast, so it's not adding as much alkalinity it doesn't add as much alkalinity and calcium in the tank. And then as I back off of and of course you got to test during this whole process, continually test. But as I back off the mils that I'm dosing, from my 2-part, I'm also increasing either the flow rate or the pH inside my calcium reactor to adjust to compensate for one or the other. And then pretty soon I have all of my stuff. I have my 2-part weaned off my system, and my calcium reactor is fully functional and maintaining my alkalinity, my calcium. Then I can just pull the 2-part off.
I agree. I don't think I would do just turn off the 2-part and turn on the calcium reactor. But one of the things that I might consider is take my 2-part dose and cut it in half. And then turn the calcium reactor on and try to figure out how much fluent do I need for that. And then once I get that down, because I know I'm not going to be plummeting now because I'm dosing still half of my 2-part.
Right.
And then say I figure out, hey man, it's 20 milliliters in an hour that makes up half of it. Well, I can probably now just turn off the 2-part and double it to 40 milliliters. It might not be perfect, and we'll get to some of that reason why, but it'll be pretty darn close.
Yeah.
But you can take baby steps instead of just turn something off, and then for the first time, you never used a calcium reactor before, switching knobs and stuff. So I would absolutely consider not doing that.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're going to try to figure out. Any good tea. Cole's always asking me, what do you got there again?
This is, what is it? Oh, Zen tea from Tazo. It's lightly caffeinated.
Lightly caffeinated.
caffeinated.
I got no caffeine, but I drank too much coffee already. So I got, I don't know, some orange blossom. Not wild orange something or other. Sorry, I know nobody cares. Last night, though, we had, what was it? What was I just telling you about?
The cucumber and slightly a little bit of lime infused.
Love that tea, man. I don't know. All right, so let's start off with this first question here, man, that we decided we were going to answer, and then maybe get a couple of answers to fill that in. Can calcium reactors be as easy or easier than 2-part or Kalkwasser, man? I'm gonna take the Kalkwasser one. Maybe you can shoot. Can it be easier than 2-part, man?
I kind of already, I kind of explained it when my reasoning for having a calcium reactor, why I would choose one over 2-part. When it comes down to it, I forget all the time. Unless I have some kind of timer, or unless unless my dosing reservoir for my 2-part is right in front of my face, I'm gonna forget sometimes to refill it. And then maybe I only test weekly, and then all of a sudden I test and I'm like, oh, where did all my alkalinity go? And then I go look and I'm empty, and I got to go mix them up, and there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot to that, and there's something to be said for me personally about my approach to reef keeping, where I can have the calcium reactor and go this many mils per minute, this pH in the thing, and I've tested it over the course of several days, and my alkalinity is solid. I don't have to worry about it. I can come back in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, in a month, in 2 months, and see that everything is just as stable. So now that's my main reason. So as far as easier than 2-part, other than changing out media and monitoring my CO2 tank to make sure I'm not running empty, which could last a timeline of multiple months on end, for me that's easier. And Yeah, I mean, adjusting dosages, dealing with precipitate if I get imbalances in my tank. The salinity thing that you were talking about. If I'm doing something like a Triton method, or if I'm doing like a low water change type approach to reef keeping, where maybe I'm not changing water every week or 2 weeks, and I start to get, I've got a non-dry or a more dry skim on my skimmer. Then I have to watch my salinity too, because salinity is going to, with the 2-part salts going in, your salinity is slowly going to rise over time, and that's another thing I don't get with calcium reactors. So it's one of those things I don't have to worry about anymore.
So I'll just add on that I think, man, that I think he's right in the essence that long-term use of the calcium reactor is probably easier than 2-part. It just requires less maintenance. Like I don't have to fill up the jugs all the time. I don't have to watch them. I don't have to worry about trace elements probably as much.
True.
And but the setup, I don't know anybody that, if you've never done it before, there's no universe where the calcium reactor is easier than 2-part. You got to learn something, man. Like 2-part, what do you do? I figure out that I'm going to dose 100 milliliters. The levels drop a little bit, so I do 110 instead. That. It doesn't get any easier than that. But long term, I got to release the jugs. Probably got to do something about some trace elements with some of these things, unless I'm using really expensive options. Mm-hmm. And probably got to worry about water changes a little bit more with salinity and overall chemistry. So, once you dial the thing in, especially in a more stable tank, I think, could be easier. And so in relation to Kalkwasser, Kalkwasser is maybe the easiest thing I can think of. There's so many avenues of Kalkwasser out there that, a lot of discussion. But if I was just going to, boil it down to nothing, man, it's add, anywhere between a half a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons to a gallon of water in my auto top-off, and done. My pH is high, my calcium alkalinity spot on, I've replaced all my evaporated water, all in one thing. That's pretty damn easy. But the thing that really kind of unravels from there is a lot of people that have done that, have found that they used a cheap auto top off that flooded their tank full of Kalkwasser. I did that a long time ago especially when you're relying on the little moving parts in salt water or with salt creep are a terrible idea. They're not as bad as if you're going to keep the float out of the water where it doesn't get salt creep and snails and stuff on it. But if it's in the water, I'd call it a terrible, terrible idea, in my opinion. I use it after that with the osmolator, use a little optical eye. Once in a while, the osmolator will get dirty and it will fail in the off position. But I've still, to this day, never seen one fail in the on position, which is what I'd be worried about, especially with Kalkwasser. But if you have a pH controller or whatnot, you can turn the thing off if ever dosed. But so it starts to get more complex when you recognize the dangers of the Kalkwasser and start protecting yourself against them. And I'd also say it's actually more complex in some ways because what I'm really relying on now is the dose of Kalkwasser is based on how much I evaporate a day. And so that changes with seasons, whether or not your windows are open, all kinds of things.
Which starts to fluctuate your alkalinity and calcium levels and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, so things will definitely change through the season.
But another thing about Kalkwasser that people, I've was always under the impression, too, that, there's limitations with Kalkwasser. Like a Kalkwasser can't maintain a heavy, high-demand tank. I don't know if it's necessarily true. If you're using it in an ATO situation only at 2 teaspoons max saturation, yeah, probably it's going to hit a point where you're just not going to keep up because you're not evaporating as much water as your ATO is putting in at that concentration. But when we set up the ULM tanks, where we're feeding a calc stir that is constantly saturated, it's nonstop, fully saturated Kalkwasser at all times, and you're purposefully dosing it to the tank, and then you have an ATO completely separate of the tank that's doing its ATO thing. So now you can actually increase the amount of Kalkwasser solution, max saturation, that you're dosing to the tank, which in turn starts to allow you to maintain high demand tanks or higher demand tanks with Kalkwasser alone. More moving parts. Again, you're talking dosing pump, you're talking calc stir, you're talking initial upfront costs and stuff like that. But as far as
just give a final answer on this, then I guess, man.
Can it be easier or easy?
Can calcium reactor be as easy or easier than 2-part Kalkwasser? Long-term maintenance after you figure out how to use it, I think it can.
Yeah.
Learning it in the beginning, nope. I think in the beginning, man, you have to be willing to learn how to use your gear.
True.
And it is a more interesting, dynamic thing to do than dosing some calcium chloride to your tank, which is pretty simple.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so can calcium? Let's see if there's any questions up here real quick.
There's a few of them.
When starting a new tank, do you run a calcium reactor during the cycle? I'd like to learn how to use it before the corals go in, but I wasn't sure if demand would be there. Hey, man, Brett, absolutely, dude. I would run it well, the tank of the cycle, and if only, man, because I want to learn what it does and how it does it before the corals go in there. So, like your, my thought process there is spot on. Your tank probably isn't going to consume a whole lot of calcium and alkalinity, specifically if you have no coralline algae or anything in there. But, man, you can start to get an idea of what raises it, a DKH a day or half a DKH or whatever before you put corals in there, man. So you may find you need to get a couple water changes to bring it back down, but, that would be a good idea to figure out how to use it. Maybe grab one here.
Yeah, this Reef Keeper's asking, he's recommend pulling instead of pushing. Is there notice of a buildup of CO2 causing noise in the reactor? I'd probably say that's probably more related to the calcium reactor itself and how it recirculates the air or CO2. A lot of the calcium reactors, like the Geo's Reef calcium reactor that I had, I think the Vertex one have ports in them that specifically draw pockets of air or maybe CO2 that's built up in there and draws it and recirculates it back in, which eventually over time, like I think somebody on AskBRS TV Facebook group was talking about, hey, I've got air in my Vertex calcium reactor. I'm pulling through the reactor like you had recommended, but it's still got air in there. And then follow up on that was, okay, 2 days later, I don't have any more air in there. It took a while for that air to recirculate, or that excess CO2 to recirculate out, and then get back into the tank to where you got a full siphon going on inside of the reactor. So it may work. It may not be the same with like some other brand reactor who doesn't have that feature or has the feature a different way or configured a different way. It's probably all different, but from the Vertex one specifically, I know that one guy on AskBRS TV had solved it in like 2 days.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. Like most of the time with noise with these things, it will be because air got caught in the pump somewhere in there, and just turning it on and off doesn't always work, and just letting it run. So, before you get too upset, just making a little bit of noise, let it run for a week. I don't know, and it probably won't have that issue. Have you ever tested a calcium reactor to the air intake of the skimmer? I don't know what that means, actually. I don't know how you would do that. Did you guys ever test the calcium reactor to the air intake of a skimmer? I have no idea what that means.
Nope.
Would you...
I don't know, unless dripping the effluent into the air intake of the skimmer, but then this defeats the purpose of drawing in air. You're not drawing in air, you're drawing
yeah, man. Oh, well, then I guess you'd be gassing off the CO2, maybe?
Possibly.
Oh.
So you drip your effluent right at the intake of the calcium reactor, which then would bubble up inside of the chamber, air, water, and mixture chamber of the skimmer.
I'm writing this down. Maybe we'll give it a try. This pen sucks. But, yeah, so, I don't know, man. If you added to the effluent in, well, first thing, you're definitely going to, probably calcify your pumps, by the way. So get prepared to clean take apart your skimmer pump all the time.
If you drip it directly to the front of the pump.
Yeah, if you drip right in front of the pump or into the skimmer itself. But if you did that, I think there's probably a good chance that you could gas off the excess CO2, before it enters the tank. And have one of the things about a calcium reactor is it will lower the pH of the tank just a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but if it was recirculating high calcium and alkalinity inside the pump, man, get prepared to build up, all kinds of precipitate on that pump. So I guess I probably wouldn't do that.
I like this one from Richard Gaston. He asks, and I'll let you take this one because you have. Is there a particular size of tank that you would recommend using a calcium reactor? So basically, sizing your calcium reactor in your tank. What's your thoughts on that? Too big is too big, small is too small? How do you feel?
Well, you know what, man? I mean, I guess, there's two questions there. Like, is there a size of tank that miraculously it's worthwhile to do a calcium reactor? Yeah, like 8,000 gallons for sure there. Like whatever. There's some point where like there's a cost ratio, and if you want to go calculate that out, you could figure it out. Depending on how much you're going to spend on it. The reality is that cost ratio, man, very rarely, includes the fact that I may have to change the pumps and stuff out every 4 years or whatever, right? Like, I mean, stuff in saltwater breaks. So, I just don't think you do this, man, pure cost savings in most cases, unless you got just a super mega system. Like over at Worldwide, they have all calcium reactors, but these are super, super big systems where, trying to add calcium and alkalinity via two parts and stuff would be super expensive. And it probably would have salinity issues due to the sheer volume or amount of liquid that they're adding to the tanks, and it just makes total cost effective in that kind of like commercial environment. In a home environment, I just don't think it hits that point. But as far as, so I would do it for different reasons. I do it because it's the salinity, it's cool gear, it's fun, it's almost like a little science extension of your tank, man. It's just neat to share with people and explain. I don't know, man. It's just cool. So, in terms of size to your tank, I don't think you can really oversize one. I think it'd be impossible, actually, like other than you ran out of space, right? Because, for the most part, the only thing I'm really doing here is dissolving the media. I can go too small. And if I go too small, man, it means I need to add excess CO2 to dissolve the media faster.
Keep up with demand,
right? And then I'm going to add too much CO2 to my tank. But if I go big, I'm just going to slow I'm going to probably have max saturation at all times. So the bigger you go, the closer you'll get to like a max saturated, for that pH solution that is super stable and easy to control. So, budgets, are a different thing, but space, outside of budgets and space, man, I'd go the biggest I could possibly get because it'd be the stablest. I'd have to change out the media, the least frequent. It'd be the best. It's not like a protein skimmer where actually getting too big actually decreases performance and probably won't work on your system at all. This is a situation where, the bigger you get, the better it'll probably perform and require the least amount of work. It'll be the most stable and probably the easiest to tune as well.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, you're talking about pH and flow rates and saturation inside. Should we hit this?
Yeah,
should we hit some
absolutely.
Of this stuff?
So we got
2 ways.
What are the 2 simplest ways to tune a calcium reactor? I'm just going to share the 2 ways. I'll let him go the first one. But there's 2 ways to, or actually there's 3 ways to tune a calcium reactor. So the goal is to have a fairly high calcium and alkalinity effluent coming out of this reactor, and there's 2 ways to do it. One, I can just dose more fluid. I can just make sure instead of doing 20 milliliters a minute, I'll do 40. Theoretically, I could double the amount of calcium alkalinity. Now, there's a reason why that might not be true, because I might be pumping it too fast, and now it's not the same concentration. But if I had a big reactor, it probably is. It probably stays at max. But a small one, maybe not. But you'll have to test it, The other way, instead of dosing more fluid, theoretically, I can make the fluid more concentrated. So at a pH of 6.7 or 8, it might be it might be 20 DKH at that flow rate coming out of there. But at a pH of 6.4 or 5, it might very well be 30 DKH. So I increase the potency of that fluid 50%. So there's 2 ways to do this. One is add more fluid. The other one is increase the concentration with more CO2 and the pH. And then some people will go like total mad scientists and try to do both, and I will if you're a super pro out there and you're saying, hey, I do both, that's the best way, great, man, super, awesome for you. But for the average person out there that's learning how to do this, do not do both. Peg one. Peg one, man. Like, hit a 6.8 pH and adjust your fluid until it works. And if at some point, man, you've maxed it out and it doesn't work anymore, go ahead and drop your pH a little bit in the solution and then go ahead. But peg one and change the other, and different people will go different ways. So I'll let you start with how you did yours and pegging fluid.
Yeah, so what I did, like Ryan was saying, that was so I've got an adjustable, continuous duty adjustable pump. That's kind of key here when we're talking about some of these different adjustments. That's really what makes it easier. You can feed off of a manifold, off of your tank. You can feed from a feed pump. But when we're talking about making this the simplest approach, the dialing in a calcium reactor, I mean, where I can turn an adjustment knob and go from 20 mils a minute to 30 mils a minute to 31 mils a minute and make those small adjustments, that makes this process a whole lot easier. But what I did before, CaRx came out with their continuous duty dosing pump, I had one of those big hospital grade Masterflex dosing pumps, and I had it set 30 mils a minute. That was it. I was just going to 30 mils a minute is all I'm going to pump into my tank, and then I'm going to play around with checking my alkalinity and seeing if the pH inside my reactor, which dissolves at different pHs, dissolves the media faster or slower, which increases or decreases the potency of the fluid inside. I'm going to play with my pH and figure out at what pH or what set pH that I can have my controller dose more CO2 or shut off CO2. And that's going to be the determining factor of how I maintain alkalinity in my tank. So I'll test my tank. It's at 8.0 at 6.6 or 6.6 pH inside my reactor. So I set my apex to say, if my pH probe inside my reactor is 6.6 or higher than or less than, then turn off and on the CO2. So I toggle. So what I do is now I'm playing with pH. If I find that 8.0 at 6 or 6.7 DKH, that my alk levels start to drop, then I know I need to increase the potency. So then I just adjust my pH probe to be 6.6 or 6.5, and I just climb down that alkalinity or that pH scale until I find the pH where my alkalinity stays at 8 DKH. I'm not adjusting the flow at all. It's 30 mils a minute constantly. All I'm doing is at 6.7, I'm declining in DKH. At 6.6, it's starting to flatten out. At 6.5, it's dead steady on 8.0 DKH. Then I know I'll just set it at 6.5, 30 mils a minute's it, I'm done. I walk away. And I test every once in a while.
All right,
I'm a little confusing.
I'm going to dumb that down to my level. All right?
Go ahead.
Anyway, so what he did is peg the flow rate. So
Yeah.
the thing's doing 20 milliliters or whatever it is, whatever he set it to, with the Masterflex dosing pump. Just peg the flow rate. It will always dose this much 24 hours a day. And then based on the tank's needs, adjust the concentration by lowering or raising the pH inside the reactor using carbon dioxide.
Yeah, there you go.
Right?
Exactly.
So some of that nerdy talk there, man, I spoke to some of you, but like for some of us, let's boil it down to a little easier. So I'm going to do the opposite, man. I think that like the opposite makes the most sense to me, and I think you can debate this if you want.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to do is try to peg the concentration, meaning that I'm going to get at a 6.8 pH inside the reactor. If I maintain that, I'm going to hopefully hit like a max solubility of calcium and alkalinity at that pH, and then I'm just going to dose that to the tank. And if 20 milliliters isn't enough, man, it'll be just like 2-part, man. I'm just going to turn it up to 30. If that isn't enough, I'll turn it up to 40, right? And there's a point, man, where for the size of the reactor, you probably won't stay at max saturation anymore, but they'll still probably work, because you're just going to add more and more. But, if you have a big reactor with lots of media or finer bits of media with lots of surface area, it's probably going to stay somewhere near max saturation for that pH or pretty stable. So just to dumb that nonsense down, peg the pH in the reactor, keep it at 6.8, and just dose the amount that comes out of it. Yeah. And the big thing here is, what's the name of that dosing pump from CaRx now?
The
FTX?
the FX or the FX STP or something like that.
That thing. So there is a continuous duty dosing pump from CaRx now. I think it's like $200 and some bucks. And now that thing is the game changer because you had a $4,000 pump. It was used on eBay for probably $500. But now you got, and that thing's giant. This thing, the CaRx pump's the size of my phone, but a couple inches taller. And, that thing, man, I can just tune a very controlled amount. Continuous duty means designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it's calibratable, so I can make sure it's accurate. And I can dose either for him I can make sure it peg it at 30 milliliters a minute. Or for me, I can just say, hey, I want more calcium, go from 30 to 33, but keep the pH same. So, that's the thing, man. I think that, like, what was the question here again? What are the two simplest ways to do it? And the simplest way is a little bit more flow or a little bit less pH. That's it. Like one or the other, man. Like, you boil all the shenanigans down, it only has to be that. Go into my controller and change it from 6.8 to 6.7. I'll dose more calcium, and inverse, if I peg the pH, if I go from 33 to 36, I'll dose more calcium now. So, and alkalinity and presumably trace elements. All right. So within that, hey, we'll stop for a couple questions. Let's see what we got here.
I think Douglas has a pretty good one there. He says, I just got to the point where I need to start dosing calcium and alkalinity. Is a calcium reactor the best way to do that since I don't have a real high demand in my tank? I think the discussion in the community has always been, not always been, but sort of the large understanding, my initial understanding of, Kalkwasser 2-part calcium reactor is, I used to be in the camp that, okay, I'll start with Kalkwasser in my ATO, and when that doesn't keep up with my demand, then I'll upgrade to 2-part, and when I get to a point where 2-part becomes either too high a maintenance or I'm dosing, multiple hundreds of mils, then I'll upgrade to a calcium reactor. I think we're past that now to where we know that each one of these are viable for high demands or higher demands. So it really comes down to, it really comes down to, for me, like, what do I want to do with this tank? Like, now that I've done all three of these, I've done Kalkwasser, I've done 2-part, I've done calcium reactor, so I know my ins and outs of each one. Like, for my next tank setup, what do I want to do? Do I want to do 2-part? It's a viable option. Maybe it's a softy tank, or maybe it's, an LPS and softy tank that's really low demand and always going to be real low demand. I don't necessarily need a calcium reactor on that thing. I could probably get away with, I can get away with Kalkwasser. I can get away with 2-part. And I could probably get away with 2-part with minimal amount of maintenance too. A large tank like this, I'm going SPS dominant. I might just automatically go for that calcium reactor because I know from experience how that calcium reactor can work for me. But a calcium reactor you can use on a lower demand, maybe something where you're dosing 100 mils a day of 2-part. For some people, stick with 2-part, and you can stick with 2-part for a long time. You could go to a calcium reactor, and you could start with a low demand with a calcium reactor and build yourself up to a high demand with a calcium reactor. It's really up to you on one, and that initial cost is probably the biggest thing for some people. But
it's not cheap.
Yeah, but I like to stop thinking about it now as like a progression, but more or less like what's just kind of best for the tank approach. The tank that I'm aiming for in volume and the tank that I'm aiming for in like SPS dominant or LPS or mixed tank, what's probably the easiest to do for that type of system. So I don't know.
I'd say that, like, a lot of people are on that, like, unicorn hunt looking for best, and, like, when we refer to each other as best, like, people forget, like, what my budget is, what my size tank is, what's in it, what my goals are. Do I like gear? Do I not like gear?
Yeah.
Do I like toying with things? What is it? Like, those are all different to each person, so there's no best, there's just best to your specific needs. It is not cheap. There's no scenario where buying a calcium reactor and operating it properly is the cheapest way to do it. But cheap might not be the thing that you're after, and a lot of us it definitely is. But for other people, it's, hey man, this is a hobby. I want to put cool gear in my tank. I enjoy installing cool gear on it. I enjoy making the sump area look as cool as the display itself. That is not important to a lot of people. So some people, that's part of the hobby. And for everybody who's ever chromed out an alternator, they know exactly what that means. It did not go faster, But hey, man, you pop the hood and it looked cool. So, I just think that, for a general answer to that question would be most people would not buy a calcium reactor for a low demand tank. But that doesn't mean that you can't. And if I had to like give some kind of generic, point of like what is the best possible way to add calcium and alkalinity to your tank, I guess I'll go out on a limb here. This is not applicable to everybody again, but like I guess I'd say calcium reactor again because I'm not adding all that excess calcium or sodium and chloride to my tank. I am adding some kind of natural trace elements to the tank. It's way more precise than some of the like a Kalkwasser and evaporation is, and I don't know, man, it's just like a lot more natural to take coral skeleton and turn it into coral than it is to take calcium chloride and turn it into coral. Yeah, and like, I mean, these are, you know, that may speak to you or it may not, but like there is, again, no best. But if I had to pick one because you were going to make me, I guess I'd say that, you know, and you know, I wouldn't say, again, it's the cheapest because it ain't. The cheapest is definitely Kalkwasser, just followed quickly by like bulk 2-part. And then it gets pretty hairy after that. Once you get into the commercial 2-parts, they're often a lot more expensive. So, you know, there's some benefits, but if you're going to go Kalkwasser versus the commercial 2-part, the math gets fuzzy real fast. You know, it goes into the favor of the calcium reactor much, much quicker.
Yeah.
All right. So, what CA media would you use and why? So go ahead, man. There's a handful of them out there. I've seen a couple of different things, like one of them, little coral bits. You know, there's very obviously little pieces of Acropora or stony corals. I've also seen them with, you know, what looks like, you know, little rocks or, you know, chunky material.
Yeah, large sand particles.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've also seen like lab type material that is pure. Presumably anyway, that is like a precipitate, a calcium and carbonate, like kind of like a pure source of limestone. Yeah. And so, what would you use?
I mean, so when I had mine set up, mainly because I was watching this guy's videos back when I was setting mine up, that two little fishies reborn stuff, and because your media, like he said, your media looks like branches. It's branched. It's coral bits. So yeah, I mean, if I'm melted, like you said, you know, it's natural for me to melt coral bits to make corals. So there's something to be said about that. And then, you know, it's particle size is another thing too. And that reborn media has the particle set. I mean, there's a set. I would say more medium to coarse size media bits. One, because you know. You get a lot of surface area with the smaller particle size, like the granular size, the rocks and stuff like that. But for my low demand tank, you know, I could fill up a small chamber with a half a bag of this stuff, and it would last me like 3 months, and I didn't have to worry. And as it melted down, I'm not clogging my circulation pump with some of the smaller bits. If you get like sand granular size type stuff, some people have mentioned that, you know, it clogs their pumps, or as some of the different types of medias melts, it becomes smaller and then might clog the pump or cause, you know, strain on the pump. Maybe that gets pushed into your effluent drip line, and then your effluent drip line gets clogged. You know, with the larger bits, I never really noticed that problem with them. And Ryan told me to use them because that's what he used in the 52 weeks of reefing. So,
well, that's at least what we talked about, yeah. So, yeah, I go the same way, man. I mean, I can't help it. You know, the ones that look like Acropora, well, that's what I'm trying to turn it into. Yeah. You know, I'm trying to dissolve it and turn it into new Acropora. So, like, why wouldn't I want to do that? But that said, I'm just going to throw this out there. You know, like everything bound up in an organic organism isn't necessarily beneficial. So there's highly likely some phosphate, you know, built up in his skeleton and some other things. But, you know, my guess is it's nothing compared to like what you're putting in there via food. But, you know, it's probably some small amount of, you know, something that is in there. And that's where it gets a little hairy for me with some of the other options out there. So the other options that don't look like, they just look like little rocks and stuff. I don't know where that came from, and like I don't really know what it is, you know. So it's probably okay. I mean, people use it all the time, like all the CaRx stuff. You know, it comes in various sizes, and some of it obviously has little shells in it, like looks like coarse grade sand almost. And you know, I don't know. You know, I just prefer the Acropora, but I'm not. I think we're going to find out which one is the best on various terms.
Oh yeah.
But like, I just don't think. You know, if I was going to just pick one out of thin air, man, it would definitely be the one that resembles what I'm trying to create.
Yeah.
But in terms of size here, one of the things, man, there used to be like, you know, information ebbs and flows, right? And so back in the day, everybody was trying to get smaller and smaller and smaller bits of calcium reactor because you create more surface area, which means the media melts faster. You can put more in there. It works better, blah, 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 blah. Except for those are all true. Except for it clogs the system up, right? And just jams. There's so little water flow through the thing. So, like, most of these reactors do not work well with these tiny, super fine medias. And so people start going coarser and coarser and coarser. And then you find out, like, you know what? I would actually rather buy a bigger reactor and use super extra coarse media and just change it out less frequently. You know, so I'd rather have less headaches in a larger reactor. You know, so that kind of depends. If you're already pinned in, man, hey, I have my tank. Like I bought a certain size reactor. I've been using it, and all of a sudden, man, I hit like maximum this thing can handle. Right? Well, I'm not gonna go buy a new reactor. So like maybe I'll change the size of media down progressively to try to compensate for that, and prevent me from having to buy new gear. In case you want to buy new gear, maybe. But, I would really try to consider that. And then there's actually those, lab-type ones out there. And I know Elos made one, and I'd have to look into...
calcium carbonate?
It's just like a precipitated calcium carbonate, labby type pure. And, if you're super concerned about contaminants and stuff that might be bound up in the corals live, the coral that was thriving in the ocean, so it can't be that bad. But if you're really concerned about that, you're really hyper concerned about phosphate or something, because that's almost certainly in there in some tiny amount. You could use that, but I think you lose all the benefits of all the trace elements. Or presumably. One day I'm not gonna have to say that word presumably anymore.
We're gonna actually test this stuff.
We're gonna test it, man. So. But you lose the thought process that this is adding all the trace elements back to the tank if you use that kind of stuff. But I think we'll get to the bottom of that, man, and get a little better idea.
Yeah, Copy's question kind of feeds into this, where you might have a couple of these. How often do you replace media on a reactor, and is there a point where it isn't effective? This is really probably going to be based. We're talking again about the surface area of your reactor media. So more reactor media in the chamber, more surface area for CO2 to melt the different types of media. As that depletes, you're running out of surface area to melt, which could lead, which I would assume would lead to less concentration inside of the reactor, which you would probably see as far as like an alkalinity or calcium drop. You would be a drop in your main levels, and in which case, as you look at that, I'm always the proponent of when this thing gets down to like a quarter full. Like if I had a full thing and I'm getting down to this little quarter, as cheap as media can be and as quick as it is to change out, just go ahead and replace it back up, because for me it probably took. Like you said, how long is it going to last in there? It's going to be dependent on your demand in your tank, but like my heavy demand SPS 125 gallon tank that had a small little reactor, probably like one of the smaller bags of the Two Little Fishes Reborn. 3, 4, 5 months, I think, before I finally have to get it to a point where I have to swap it out. So there's a long timeline on that. So rather than wait until the very last minute where you start to see a decrease in alk, when that thing gets down to like this much, either fill it back up or pull it out, rinse it out, put all new media back in, and start over.
So I know the guys at Worldwide, they'd actually just top it off.
Top it off.
Yeah. So it would go down a fourth or half or whatever, then they just top it off, and then I can't remember if they said they do it once or twice. But what happens to that media, as it's being dissolved, is it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so at some point you got fine media that jams in your pumps and stuff. So what they do is to top it off a few times or once or twice, and then just dump the whole thing out the next time. And the stuff isn't that expensive, so that's probably some of the best advice. You could probably get real nerdy about it and sift it if you wanted or something, but I don't think it's probably worth most people's time. So on the topic of sizing, your size splits tank sizes for high, medium, and low alk demand for some of the reactors. What does BRS consider high, medium, or low alk demand? Man, those are really, kind of vague, things. But I would say your low demand, man, is a bunch of LPS in there that is consuming. You got your calcium, or you got your coralline algae that once it starts covering everything actually has a pretty high demand. And then you have your mixed tank with a handful of SPS corals in there. And then if you have your high demand tank, it's kind of wall to wall SPS. There's lots of colonies in there, but I'm sure there's a very high after that.
Right.
So the thing is again, you can't go too big. And most of these things are pretty large. And I was looking at the sizing of them for, I can't remember what video that was for, but I was looking at the sizing recently, and I have to say, I think most of them are pretty accurate. So skimmers, I think, are sometimes kind of ridiculous, the way they try to, size those things. Mm-hmm. But I thought the calcium reactor suggestions were, pretty spot on, man. So I guess I'd follow that. And if I had to lean one way or another, I'd probably lean to the heavy side because that'll give me room to grow. And I will definitely, it can't get too big other than space and budget.
Mm-hmm. I like this question right here. Milton wants to know, do you need a second chamber in the calcium reactor? And if so, can I convert a biopellet reactor to use as the second chamber?
Yeah, why not? So one of the things about what they say coming out of the reactor media or the main reactor is it's going to have some excess CO2 in it.
In the effluent.
That's in the effluent. And I don't know, how. This is one kind of because nobody's really definitively shown this.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like a little bit of a fairy tale to me, but I don't know. And I'm going to find out for you though, for sure, one way or another. But there's a little bit of excess CO2 in there, so the water that's coming out there is a lower pH. If we get the rest of that CO2 off, hopefully it will lower the pH of the tank a little less. And then in terms of that, there's a lot of reactors that already have a second one of those guys on there.
Right.
But
a small one.
I mean, literally, you could do it with anything.
Could.
There's this isn't a real advanced piece of equipment after that. Just a hose that you could fill up anything. I don't know your biopellet reactor specifically, but it's a cylindrical tube. You could probably fill it up with the media and probably pump the water through the bottom out the top, and it would probably serve the exact same effect. So, why not?
Solid.
All right. So what trace elements should be dosed alongside a calcium reactor? Presumably the elements in the coral soft tissue won't be contained in the reactor media.
Yeah, it makes a good point, because I thought the same thing when we were discussing the trace elements that would come from the media. I thought the same thing as far as trace elements bound in the actual live tissue or the zooxanthellae of the corals. And obviously, that to me that wouldn't translate into the actual skeleton of it. Which is something that I'm pretty excited for if we were going to test this in the Ask BRS or in the BRS TV Investigates, is we actually plan on a couple different tests. I think we're going to test different effluent or different concentrations, trace elements, sending an ICP test of running. I think we're planning on doing it. Take a container of salt water, run it through a calcium reactor, and send in the salt water itself ICP test, and then the final whatever's dripped out of the effluent ICP test. Send those in and kind of take a look at different medias too. I think we'll do it with different medias, but
probably a whole bunch of things.
But yeah, that'd be an interesting one, and I expect to find the same thing, that maybe some don't translate over to the skeleton.
This is what I'll say, man. It's for sure there's things like iodine and whatnot that probably are not inside the coral skeleton, that maybe in the tissue or something like that. But I'm gonna just go ahead and share that if you can't test for it, don't dose it. End of story, man. So if you can't test for it, you're more likely to screw things up than you are to fix it. And so between the trace elements you're probably getting from the calcium reactor and from your decent water change schedule, you're probably covered. And when I say probably, go look at the tanks over at WWC. They got 3 super awesome show tanks in the series that we showed you. And if you look at those tanks and say, oh, I want better than that, then go dose some other things, man. Or if you say, oh my gosh, man, that's the dream. If I could have that in my house, man, oh, hallelujah. Well, then don't worry about the rest of that stuff. Because they're not worried about it.
They do water changes and they do calcium reactor. And that's it.
Yeah, man, it might be some subtle other stuff, but not trace elements, the elixir though. Mm-hmm. So yeah, on the flip side of that, you can absolutely go get when I say if you don't test for it, don't dose it, I mean it. But we're in a brave new world, so you can go send out an ICP test and see over time what is it that's depleted. And they have a little bit of information on there as to what presumably will happen if this thing is depleted, how depleted it is, and you can dose that very thing. Yeah. You can do, or you might even be able to find something I bet you one of the Red Sea trace colors or one of those other things. The halogens. Yeah. Those are probably the ones that don't are probably in the live tissue, whatever. And you get pretty darn close. So don't dose things you can't test. If you do test, make sure you dose those things specifically and be careful about it. But, if you look at the WWC results and say, hallelujah, that's the tank, my dream, that's where the path I want to go on, well, then you don't need to worry about it. If you want to do better than them, then you do. So, I don't know. Figure out where you're on that scale.
Yeah.
How do you transition from dosing pumps to a calcium reactor on a 400-gallon SPS tank, 380 milliliters, 2 parts a day? So we answered this a little bit earlier today. Mm-hmm. One of the things I'd probably do is, like on a tank that big that's probably got a big investment in it, is I'd probably dose 3/4 my normal dose. So take your dose back 1/4, get the calcium reactor running, figure out where it is, and that'll be about 1/4 your dose. Get rid of half of now your 2-part, double the dose, see where you're at, and just kind of scale it back instead of flipping switches on and off. Just kind of make sure that it has as minimal of a change to the tank as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. What else?
And Mike Paletta swears by the Dasco. It's expensive and don't know about the parts availability. So are you familiar with the Dasco?
No, the Dastaco.
The Staco, yeah. Actually, this is the one that got me interested again in a calcium reactor. And the way that thing works, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but the way that thing works is it operates off of max solubility. Okay. So it doesn't use a calcium or a pH probe. It uses pressure or something in it, and a little switch to add CO2 to make sure that the thing is always dosing a maximum solubility dose. Which, hey man, if you can create maximum solubility, this is just like 2-part.
Yeah,
it's just the amount that I dose.
Yeah, true.
And so, yeah, absolutely. I'll say the availability of that thing is near zero. I think you got to buy it over at Unique Corals or something like that. Joe over there handles all that stuff for them. It's, I've asked them to stock it, but they can't even provide enough for them, and it's pretty low. So go check it out. I think another one though we probably might stock in the near future. Maybe it would be the Pac Sun one. I know that Zach is internally testing that, and he's been working on it for 6 months, making sure that it meets the standards of what we'd want to offer our customers. But it's the same kind of thing, man. It's maintaining max solubility. It comes with a continuous duty dosing pump, and it won't be cheap again. But so Mike Paletta swearing by the thing. Yeah, absolutely. Make it easy. That's definitely one. Mm-hmm. I have an ozone reactor. If I use it in the second chamber, would the pump through it nullify or reduce the CO2? So that's a good question. We were talking about on Ask BRS TV yesterday, actually. Is people, ozone is is going to create excess oxygen.
CO3 or O3?
Yeah, O3, and one of them will break off and it'll be O2.
Yeah.
Okay, pH has nothing to do with oxygen at all. So it's totally confused all the time, man. Adding air to the tank or whatever. It was one of the discussions again on Ask Viewers TV. It was how do I increase the pH of the tank? And the solutions are absolutely, the advice is almost always right.
Yeah.
It's just how it's used. So it was open up the windows to let fresh air in. Well, no, adding the oxygen into the house did not lower the pH, or raise or lower the pH. It's letting the CO2 out of the house that reduced the carbonic acid from the excess CO2 that was in the house. Same thing with, what was the other solution in there?
The skimmer air intake.
The scrubber. The scrubber was increasing the concentration of O2, which doesn't do increasing concentration of O2 has no impact on pH.
No, it's removing CO2.
Yeah, it's removing the CO2, removes the carbonic acid from the tank, which increases the pH of the tank.
And with the skimmer air intake, it's basically pulling less CO2 laden air from the outside into your home in an environment that's more CO2 laden.
Yeah, so Dave, man, don't feel bad because this is a super this is something that I would say 80% of people get wrong, and they think that adding more oxygen will change the tank's pH. Oxygen has zero to do with it. It's just getting rid of excess CO2 in the room, and you can do that by plants uptaking the CO2. You can put plants in your house. You can put plants nutrients in your sump. You can put with like Cato, like algae plants. You can pump air in from outdoors, or you can scrub it out using CO2 media. But yeah, I would not think that you're going to be able to effectively do that. I think the best way will probably be to use CO2 scrubbing media on your protein skimmer, which is something else that we'll get to in the not too distant future. And I think that we found a really cost-effective way of doing that, so you don't have to keep buying media all the time.
Yeah.
All right.
There's Reef Keeper's getting a lot of hits here. He says, Ryan, will you do a video on the setup of the Vertex and the Camor on the 160? With the day that he tells me, hey, I'd go set up the reactor on the 160 because I need to film it, then I'm sure Dave will be in here filming me set the thing up. So, yeah, probably. So I think you'll talk about it, too, right?
I can tell you almost for like 100%. I can tell you right now, leak, spoiler city, close your ears. What we're going to do is we're going to put a calcium reactor on the 160 here as part of the hybrid system because that's what WWC does, and that's because I love gear, and I'm going to do it anyway. Couldn't stop me if you wanted to. And on the XXL 750, we are going to put a calcium reactor on that one. Again, it's part of the hybrid system. They believe keeping it. I mean, actually, it's interesting because they just preach simple and stable, simple and stable, simple. And like, I actually say that like 8,000 times in these videos to the point that like, somebody gave me a really hard time about it. Like, stop saying simple and stable. We get it. Well, you know what, man? I want to drill that in. I want to get to the point where you're like, stop saying it. Because that's the point of simple and stable breed success. And so they think the calcium reactor is the simplest and stablest way to maintain calcium and alkalinity in their tanks. So we're going to do it on the XXL 750. My guess is that we're going to do two different kinds. So one, I'm going to do the Vertex reactor probably on this one. I really like the Vertex reactor. It has a little flow meter on it. It has 3 different stages of CO2 to knock off. Runs on a CJ pump. Really cool piece of it is that it comes on a plate, looks like all in one, but you can take it apart actually and take it off that plate and then fit it in your sump any way that you want to. And you don't necessarily need to use those other pieces if you're super tight on space. You don't have to use the secondary chamber. Yeah. And even if you did use a secondary chamber, the secondary chamber could actually go in the sump itself, or whatever, So, like, the whole thing probably could. So, the next one, though, we're also going to use is the Reef Octopus. I don't know if they call it the Varios version or I don't know, but they use the DC pump. And that one's, my guess, is going to be the quietest one. It's also super big, so it's going to have, almost all of these, including the Vertex one, is going to outpace a vast majority of your tanks out there, like 180 probably down, which is 95% of the tanks out there. Yeah. But getting bigger than that, we're going to probably put that one in there. And DC pumps for me, this is in a lobby. It needs to be as quiet as possible, and DC pumps are just the quietest. End of story. So we're going to run both of them. We'll give you experiences, what we found from both of them over time. And then I'm pretty certain, I'm giving away all the spoilers here, but I'm pretty certain on the 170, E-Series 170 in my office, we're probably just going to do straight up BRS 2-part, man, because that tank's supposed to be simple, stable, cheap, and easy, and small, and it doesn't have a sump on it. And so what's easier than a couple of dosing pumps and BRS 2-part and some water changes, man, and we'll show you that is absolutely going to produce results. And I know that because there are tens and tens and tens of thousands of tanks doing that very thing with results. Yeah. All right.
I think we hit everything on there.
We hit everything on here, man. Okay, well, let's ask a couple more questions. You know what? I got a couple things to share, though. Let's ask the questions, and I got a couple pieces to share after that. We'll go a little long today. Okay. Based on, you go for this one.
Based on your experience, what percentage of magnesium do you guys mix with the calcium in the calcium reactor? I never did mix calcium or magnesium media in my calcium reactor. I would test for magnesium on my own, and then if I needed to make an adjustment, I always still had my 2-part jug of magnesium mix, and I would do the calculator, pour, dose, and then let it sit. So there's that worked for me. I had like my 125 and my 93 gallon cube that worked because I barely dosed magnesium, but maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months or so. And it was a couple hundred mils, and then you're good. And then magnesium was good for the next month. But there's people that add it in the secondary chamber. There's people that add it in the primary chamber, a small layer on top. No, I don't know.
So I'll just throw this in there. That medium is like, our media is dolomite, I think, or like calcium, magnesium, something or other, whatever, carbonate. Yeah. It has a lower pH point at which it dissolves. And so one of the things you need to think about is, I don't know if there's a bunch of different ways you could do this. And, you could layer it, you could mix it throughout. But one of the things you can kind of think about is like, the stuff stripping off some of the CO2 as it's going through these big chambers. Is the pH in the top the same as the bottom? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But like, it's probably slightly higher by the time it hits the top. Is this stuff going to, melt as fast as the media? It really depends on the media that you use. So you might want to put a layer of it at the bottom. I don't know, but like, that's going to be hard to maintain. Just changing, magnesium drops so slow that like just dosing it separately is like, it's pretty easy. It's much easier than trying to play mad scientist. That doesn't mean that I won't do it, because I probably will. I'll probably add some of the dolomite to the mix and, explore it. I'll probably mix it throughout the whole thing and try to mix it, with the other media. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets more concentrated as the other media dissolves faster. But like, I'm not going to get hung up on it. If I need to dose some magnesium separately in a solution, it's super cheap, super easy. Doesn't need to do very, very frequently. The tank isn't going to show signs of distress if it drops 30 points. Like 30 points, 100, man. It probably ain't going to make a big difference in magnesium, just because, the difference between 1380 and 1280 biologically is probably nothing. Calcium, if you drop 420 to 320, it would be a lot, but it's a different kind of thing. All right. So, is a calcium reactor only beneficial for coral, or is it something else? Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess it would be beneficial.
Coralline, inverts, things that build skeletal structure or shells or things like that. Use calcium carbonate. Okay,
so not versus any other solution. It's beneficial to corals. Anything that calcifies. So any organism in the tank that uses calcium and alkalinity to build its skeletal structure, including calcareous algae like coralline, including probably snails and stuff.
Some minor degree, probably not enough to make a major heavy demand on the
probably
tank,
not, but like definitely the corals. So it's beneficial to a variety of things in there for sure. All right. Wait, what's the best test for calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium in the market? So, I bet you and me will agree 100% on the best alkalinity one.
I mean, we answer this one all the time, and it's usually the same. We're cheating off each other's homework, but around the office here, and for almost every tank that we test here, the HANA alkalinity DKH checker, so for sure.
I would never even consider using something else now. This is how it works. You fill up 10 milliliters of stuff. You put 1 milliliter thing in there, click the buttons, and you're done. Like, oh man, there's like one other step in there, but like it is, you can do it in less than 60 seconds. And I am never trying to figure out which color, purple or blue, or did it change back, or like nonsense, and it's consistent for me, and I'd never consider ever using something different. No. Calcium, though, what do you use?
I like the Red Sea. The Red Sea titration calcium has always been my go-to. Salifert is probably another one I would use. Back when I had a reef tank at my house, because now I have so many here to take care of or play around with, I don't need one at home. But I did keep a Salifert test kit and the Red Sea test kit. And primarily my Red Sea test kit was the go-to. I like the one-handed testing. It was simple. The color change seemed easy for me. And then if I got an off reading, and then I did it again and got another off reading, then I'd pull out my Salifert test kit and be like, okay, well, let me double check this one with this test kit. But the Red Sea is my go-to calcium.
Okay, so I'm just going to go to calcium and magnesium at the same time. For me, the Salifert ones are probably the easiest to read. But it's not my favorite, and there's two reasons why. One, with the Red Sea one, you can buy that kit that comes with all three of them for about the same price as both of the other ones. So it's if you get all three, the Reef Foundation thing comes calcium, alkalinity,
Yeah, it's
and
like
magnesium.
20. It's like 20, almost 20, $25 for each one individually, but I think only 50, 55 or something like that for the
like
tri
48,
kit. It's pretty cheap.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it was a savings.
But here's I mean, this stuff is like nitpicky, man, but like when you use it all the time, it actually matters. So with the Salivert, it comes in a cardboard box with paper instructions. Okay, your hands are wet when you do these things, almost always, you know, so it's using it around water. It's, you know, sitting on a table that may have water on it. The cardboard box never lasts the whole time of the test. It's always getting deteriorated. The instructions get smeared and whatever, and that may not happen for you, but it happens for a lot of people. So with the Red Sea one, there are, you know, a plastic box that it goes into. I wouldn't call it waterproof, but like unless you submerge it, it's not going to get water in it.
True.
And the instructions are like a laminated card, so I can touch it with wet hands without, you know, destroying it. And then even just the materials on it, like they have each one of the reagents has a very clearly labeled expiration date on it. They're, you know, not the cheapest things out there, so they're producing very reliable amounts or drops because the things are not cheap. The bottles are little glass bottles instead of little plastic spheres.
Yeah.
You know, and they sell reagent refills. And so after you bought the thing, the reagent refills makes it the cheapest option out there. So, you know, if you know, legibility and color change is the only important factor, I actually find the Red Sea or the Salinity or the Salifert one to be the easiest to read, but I find all the other reasons for Red Sea to be overwhelming. So pick between those two things for you.
Yeah.
If I had to trust one, like you know, which one is going to be more accurate than the other? Everything about the way the Red Sea one's put together says I care about this thing and I'm trying to produce the best.
Yeah.
So that would be the one that I would trust the most. But that's, you know, just, you know, like a personal, you know, observation from all of it, not based on fact. So I'm going to share a couple of things now for this. So we're talking calcium reactors, man, and you know, one of the things that Randy and I have been talking about a lot is like, you know, trying to get away, you know, clear up the murkiness of things, you know. And if you watch the tour that we did on the whole facility on Black Friday, go to our YouTube homepage channel and see it if you want. But you know, we walk through and see the whole place here, and you know, there's a lab that we're building out. And one of the things, man, I really want to get to the bottom of is calcium reactors, man, and like help people understand. And so these are a few of the things that you should expect to see out of us, and help you know, get to the bottom of how to make these things easier to use, make the information more accessible and easier to understand. A couple of them, excuse me. We are going to go out and you know, take a maximum solubility solution. We'll pump, you know, fresh salt water right through the thing. Let it create the maximum solubility for you know, 24 hours. Then we'll take that normal salt water and we'll take a thing of the effluent and we'll send it in for ICP testing. And I will finally be able to tell you how much trace elements and which trace elements are coming out of this thing. And you know what? Let's do it for a whole bunch of different medias, right? And so we can, you know, decide which one of these medias, A, does it have contaminants in it? B, does it have all the trace elements in it? Is one of them better than the other one? And so we can get that information to you, and I can stop using the word presumably. I will know for sure it's adding these things, right?
Yeah.
Maybe take it a step farther, man, and run some actual tanks on it, and you know, that are filled with corals, and use a calcium reactor on one of them, and use like you know, just blank 2-part on the other one, and see, you know, what levels are getting depleted in just the calcium chloride environment versus the calcium reactor one, or maybe even an alternative to that is using the like synthetic calcium reactor medias in one, and one that has all the trace elements in it. That'd probably even be better.
Yeah.
You know, and match those things up to each other and see what happens over time. Does one of them start to deplete and the other one stays proper? And then beyond that, one of the things I also want to know that, like, as a mystery for a lot of these medias is what's the max saturation point for some of these medias, and at what pH and what flow rate. So let's take you know, the reborn media from Two Little Fishes and put it at a pretty slow flow rate, and see what max solubility is at a pH of 7, 6.9, 6.8. Is it like 25 DKH, 30, 35 and 40, so on. Really get, actual information and insight, onto what is the anticipated max solubility of these medias at a different pH. Not just the two little fishes, but let's try all of the popular ones, right? And then let's turn the flow rate up at each one of these things. So at 10 milliliters a minute and at pH of 7, the max solubility maybe is 28 DKH.
Yeah.
But let's turn it up to 25 milliliters a minute, and 30 milliliters a minute, 40 milliliters a minute.
Watch that DKH concentration start to dip or
At
decline.
what point do we stop the max solubility? And then, man, let's take it one step further. What if we double the size of the calcium reactor, increase the contact time, the amount of fluid that's in there, Can we, maintain that much further out, meaning that I don't have to have as low of a pH to get the same solution out of it, and really start to explore, the effects of the flow rate and how that affects flow rate and pH and how that affects flow rate, pH, and media type and how that affects max solubility of the media. Because for me, the number one thing here will be, if we can identify where the max solubility is, let's set the system up to do that. And then all we need to do is change the amount that we dose. And that'll be a really big deal for me. And to help everybody get this down to, dude, all you got to do is assemble the reactor, put some media in it, set the pH to 6.8.
And then play with your flow.
Play with your flow, man. That's it. There's a little knob down there. This is the only knob you care about.
It's almost easier than two-part because I don't have to, get into adjust my timing, adjust my timer on my dosing pump, or go into my apex and adjust the amount of dosing. I can walk up to the pump and go 25.
Boom.
Done.
At 25 milliliters, it's starting to drop a little bit. Let's go 27.
Yeah.
So that to me is like the holy grail of the calcium reactor. If we can pinpoint and lock down the max solubility of the various medias at various flow rates in some common reactors, well, now, man, it is so easy. I can give you very direct advice of, hey, man, with this reactor and this media, set it up to pH or whatever, and 6.7 precisely, and just change the flow rate, man. From there, you'll be good. And this will be the easiest thing you've ever done on your tank, man. It'll be easier than two-part. It'll be easier than Kalkwasser. It won't be cheaper, but it'll be easier and cooler. So,
Cool.
What else are we going to do with that thing, man? Any other tests? I know we had a bunch of them.
We were talking about a whole bunch of them.
I don't know. We got a whole list of them, but man. So for me, I just really in 2019, I really want to start answering more questions, and really get to the bottom, especially some of this complex stuff that's always been kind of in a shrouded mystery of I don't know. I really love the calcium reactor, but it seems so complex.
Yeah.
And you know what? It doesn't have to be. It's just if you read a forum post on how to do a calcium reactor,
eyes crossed.
Yeah, man.
That's how I learned.
It's just so much information, and it's just really not refined, and everybody's arguing with each other their favorite way.
Yeah.
And hey, man, there is a best way, but let's just get a way that works, and then you can go from there.
Yeah.
That every single person, if you did it this way, would achieve results. Then you can expand your knowledge point from that point.
Yeah.
But just not get stuck on my way or the perfection of whatever, right? All right. Any other questions here we want to answer before we roll out?
Looking at a few.
All right. Hey, here's one, Neil, man. I bought a calcium reactor from you, but I can never get it working properly. When I turn up the alkalinity very high, even the CO2 is set every 10 seconds, and the drip rate is at minutes or minimums. All right. So I guess I wish I could have a little bit more conversation about that one thing. So when I turn it on, the alkalinity goes very high.
So he's got the sounds like he's got a digital regulator because it's every 10 seconds. So that sounds like he's got the aquarium plant CO2 digital regulator, which means if it's every 10 seconds, it's on the slowest setting where 10 seconds bubble goes out, 10 seconds bubble goes out, and that's feeding his reactor, which is over saturated. Apparently, what it sounds like is one, he's got either a small calcium reactor with that amount of CO2 going in, causing a high DKH inside the reactor, and then what I'm wondering is what his dose or what his flow rate is through the calcium reactor and going into the tank. That maybe he needs to dial back flow because he's adding too much saturated solution into the tank, which is causing the alkalinity to skyrocket. Or he's got his pH set too low to where it might be dissolving the media too much and creating a very highly concentrated solution. I mean, just because people say start at 6.6 doesn't mean you have to stay at like 6.6 or 6.4. For me, when I had a lower demand, I was at like 7 DKH, 7.1, which means less concentration alkalinity in my calcium reactor, same bubble drip rate, but less concentration in there, and with a slower flow or with a flow amount, I'm dosing less, which means I'm not skyrocketing in my alkalinity. Those are a couple things I'd check, though.
Okay, so best advice you'll hear all day on this, man. It's hard to answer your question in its entirety. Best advice you hear all day is do one of two things. Peg the pH inside the reactor and then adjust the flow rate to what you need. And if it's dosing too much, dose less fluid. Or peg the amount that you're going to dose to the tank, the effluent flow rate, and change the pH in the reactor. So the bubble count really is part of the pH, but I would use the way that most people will set this up would be use a pH controller and a solenoid or to turn off your carbon doser or whatnot, so that it controls the pH and pegs it at wherever it's going to peg, and then use the bubble count as a backup. So have it set so it's like just slightly above or below. I'm not sure which one you'd want to do, but different reasons for each. But right at that level, and so they back each other up. And I guess I'd probably go just beyond. I trust the pH controller, and this would back it up if the pH controller drifted. And I'll just throw one other thing in there. So also, you're going to use a pH control or pH thing. So you got to definitely calibrate your probes every now and then.
Yeah, for sure.
I would probably do it quarterly or whatnot. And you don't necessarily always need to calibrate them, because if you can pull it out there and you put it in your 7.1 and it reads 7.1 and you put it in your 10.01 or whatever and it reads that, the thing is calibrate. You don't need to redo it. In fact, you'll maybe mess it up if you do it. So if it reads the solutions right, man, it's good. But if it isn't, then you should recalibrate it. And I would absolutely, the lab grade misnomer or the label to probes is garbage. It means nothing. It means that it has a BCC connector on it. Doesn't mean anything. The big difference, though, between these probes is definitely the dual junction. So I'm not going to be super nerdy about it, but there's two little barriers inside there. Or in a single junction is just one at the bottom, and proteins in the tank, get stuck to I think the silver potassium nitrate or whatever in there and fouls the whole thing up. If you have a second junction in there, it makes it super, super hard for that to happen and makes the probe last way longer, increases the accuracy, and costs marginally more.
Yeah.
If it's just an average tank and you don't, just putting it in your tank and you just want to know the pH of your tank within reason, maybe you could go with a single junction.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to use it to control equipment to create a precise level of solution, or concentration of solution, but accuracy counts. So spend the extra $20 for sure. And get one that's going to last longer, calibrate longer, and be more accurate. Double junction, absolutely the way to go.
Yeah, one thing I'd add here too, Neil, if Neil's not using the continuous duty peristaltic dosing pump to control flow rate, and you're using the little valve at the end of your effluent to control flow rate, I would almost find it probably easier to maybe do the adjustment of the pH and try to peg your flow rate, because you've got a steady, continuous flow rate pump feeding this thing. It's nonstop. It doesn't change unless it's DC. Then you can make slight adjustments, but not like 20 to 21 or 22 mils per minute. And then your effluent drip, as long as you keep that clean and steady, a steady flow rate, but then to play with the pH. What I'd also mention too is we were talking about the pH in that reactor. There was another thing I was going to say about it. I forgot. But anyway, if you got a steady duty pump, if you got a steady flow rate pump that like an AC pump or maybe a DC pump with less adjustability, I'd personally start with adjusting pH for the concentration.
I personally go by the pump.
Or go by the Camor pump and be done.
I'm gonna go all the way here.
Yeah?
I'm gonna say I would not personally set up a calcium reactor without the Camor pump.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's just me. I'm not saying that everybody out there needs to do that way.
Yeah.
But having a definitive flow rate that isn't going to get mucked up by stuff falling into it, effluent, build up, or who knows what, chunks getting stuck in it, or people do like siphons and stuff, like all kinds of crazy things. And like for me, the number one benefit to a calcium reactor with improved performance, make it easier and more stable, will definitely be the continuous duty pump that's accurate and super easy to adjust, right? I would call that, like, for me personally, I wouldn't run without it. It'd be more work than I want to deal with. And this is what I say, is I am not looking for a 1-year successful tank. I'm looking for a decade successful tank. And so anything that I see as a major failure point between here and 10 years, I need to eliminate from my system. Anything that could destroy the tank. And so trying to get a siphon to be an accurate amount on there, like I just skip it, man. I would save up. Before I do it, I just, save $50 a month until I could buy the pump, and then I would do it proper. Or just buy it, whatever. But like it'd be major benefit using a controlled dose through the thing and being able to adjust it.
True.
So.
Yeah.
All right, man. I'm gonna look for one more, and then we're gonna call it a day. Talking about CO2. Is it different quality, the gas out there, concentration percentage, what should you look for? I saw this question the other day, man, and I saw one out there, man, because we often say you can go get it from like a welding store or like a paintball store or all that kinds of stuff. Somebody said, man, you need food grade, right? Food grade CO2, and that was in the Ask BRS TV group. Somebody shared that with, and I wish I could remember where you get it from. But there was differences. There's absolutely purity differences in the CO2.
That's interesting.
And it wasn't like there was one major impurity. There was a difference that wasn't really a big deal. But hey, man, I guess you could go look for food grade CO2. There is a difference in the gases. I would say most people are not using food grade CO2 out there, though. They're getting it filled up at their home brewing store. That's where it was. Home brewing, man.
Because of food grade.
Because it's food grade.
Interesting.
You figured something out. A home brewing store. Almost every market has one. They often have food grade cylinders and gas because it is being used for a food application.
That's interesting.
Well, I don't know if it's food, but
testing.
For beers. And so, so you know what? That's when I'm going to get mine.
We've got a couple.
we got the two biggest online home brewing places in Minnesota.
That's true.
It's the oddest thing. We drink a lot of beer here, I guess. Awesome. Cool. Well, we're going to call it a day, and here's my promise for you. I'm going to try my best to get out the major, minor, and trace element replacement solution for the hybrid video next week, but that's going to depend on the length. So when I finish creating all the material for it, if it's your typical 30-minute thing, there's no way Dave is going to get that done in 2 days after New Year's. It's going to have to get pushed out. So you have to listen to us ramble again maybe next Friday. But we're going to do our best to get it done. I would say like probably 25% chance it's going to happen, unless I have really nothing to say about major, minor trace elements. I think the chances of that are actually zero. So I'm going to move it down to zero. It's probably not going to happen next weekend, but we're going to move it on out. But we're going to do our best, man. I want to get back into rhythm. Holidays mess all this stuff up. Even just Black Friday was tough, man.
It's tough.
So, anyway, man, we will definitely... food grade can also be found through restaurant supply sources. As CO2 is also used in soda fountains.
Good job. Thanks, Adam.
Hey, thanks, Adam. For those who don't know, over on hashtag AskBeersTV on Facebook, we answer all kinds of questions. Adam is actually answering there all the time. He gets every single question. I do my best. Most of my posts come between the hours of about 8 o'clock and 10. Well, I'm doing bath time with my kids, and put my other baby to sleep. Calliope, I'm doing this shake. Yeah. But mine comes at night, so I do my best. But Adam, man, he's there all the time and answering every single question and really getting down to it. And he also tags me and Randy every time, man. There's something more complex that's coming up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All my posts are about like this long, so you have to read through them. It gets pretty extensive, but
yeah, I can't do that long while I'm shaking a baby. I give the minimal.
But if you haven't already, hashtag AskBRSTV. If you type that into this Facebook search, you'll find the group. Click the join. Adam will add you into the group, and then start answering questions, asking questions.
Well, you're at it too. You can also
invite your friends.
You can be friends with Randy and I too.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it's reefing. Sometimes you just get to see my Christmas dinner. I don't know, whatever we're doing. So whatever I'm doing, you get to see. But so follow us up. It's almost like the reefing Cardassians. Just crazy stuff going on anytime. You never know. Actually, it's really boring.
It's tea time with Randy and Ryan.
Tea time. See,
Thanks,
cucumber
Nicole.
Tea, right? All right. Hey, well, have an awesome weekend and a happy New Year.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are we going to do this again on Monday?
It's kind of like our day to do live. So
I don't know. Maybe we'll see you guys on Monday. We'll do something else.
We'll see.
All right. We'll see you then.
All right. Bye,
Peace.
guys.